Hello, speakers and leaders. Today we're talking about how to tell better stories. And if you want to become a better communicator, speaker, and leader, working on your storytelling skills can be one of the best things that you can do. Because when you tell stories, it makes your message more memorable, more influential, and more engaging. I know personally, I used to believe that I didn't have any stories at all. I thought my life was mundane. I didn't know how to tell stories. It wasn't until I got into more of the speaking side and I started noticing, wow, these great speakers and great leaders, they know how to tell stories really, really good. And when I started using more stories, that's really that's really when I found out, wow, I kind of tapped into this superpower that most people don't know how to use. And today we have Kelly D. Parker with us. She's an amazing storyteller, speaker, and I first met her on this app called Clubhouse. And in the back of my mind, I was like, I had to get Kelly on this interview. Now, known for her dynamic stage presence, Kelly is a professional speaker with 15 years of experience presenting at colleges, churches, and corporations. She is the founder and lead consultant at Kelly D. Parker Consulting, where she and her team teaches corporate professionals and emerging business owners the key to effective communication. A marketing professional with a career path that includes prestigious global powerhouses such as Sherwin-Williams, Cleveland Clinic, and American Greetings, Kelly has leveraged her communication skills to garner support for key business initiatives and influence C-level executives. A wife and a mom of three, Kelly enjoys some good old peace and quiet in her free time, along with a good book. Kelly, welcome. Super excited to have you today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, well, Kelly, I do want to hear more of your story, but let's dive into it. How to tell better stories. Where does one actually start when I say that? How to tell better stories? What would you say?
It's a couple of components, but I think when I think about a story, a good story, I think about a point. I think a trap that we fall into sometimes is that we don't understand the point. Like we have a lot of details, we have a lot of facts, we're trying to paint a picture, but not really. But I think hinging everything around what do you want your audience to know or do, and then using the story as a vehicle to create that emotional connection, I think that's key, like knowing what your point is. And then I think the other key component is figuring out, do I have the right story to make my point? I look at it like a marriage, right? You don't want to marry the wrong person. So the point and the story have to be like the perfect match, like a match made in heaven, right? So I think a good story is always one that like clearly, like perfectly amplifies that point. And you started to speak to another point I was thinking about too, just realizing good stories are all around you. Like you're literally living some really, really good stories if you know how to tell them and bring them to life.
Yeah, Kelly, you were talking about having a point for your stories. Do we always need to have a point? And another side question is, do we say the point first and then the story, or do we go story and then point?
Yeah, I do think you always need a point because I look at it like I don't know if it's called a bullseye or target. I always get it mixed up, but like every word coming out of your mouth needs to be hinged around whatever you want your audience to think or do. So if you're telling a story, you're not thinking about your audience, I think you're missing a boat. In terms of the order, honestly, I think it could go either way. Me personally, sometimes I'd like to start with some semblance of that point so that folks kind of know where you're going, and then you can hit right into like painting the picture of the story. But I think it's so important to clearly articulate what you want folks to know. What is that point that you want them to get, and not expect people to connect the dots for you. I think that's important. Like sometimes we think something is super obvious, and it's not necessarily to the listener. So I think having the point and knowing what it is and being able to articulate it in a single, simple sentence is more important than kind of the order, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I do want to dig more into this, but let's say for the audience that's listening, maybe it is your first time listening, and we're talking about storytelling, but maybe you don't understand the importance of storytelling yet. So, in your perspective, Kelly, why is storytelling so powerful and useful when it comes to a business sense?
Yeah, I think particularly in business, you have to understand what you are selling. Like, deeper than your product or your service, you're normally selling a feeling, you're selling some sort of outcome, you're selling an aspiration of what you could be or what you could do. And story is such a powerful tool to do that. So, for instance, I think we've all seen the amazing commercials that Nike creates, right? And it's like all these images of these fierce competitors. And, you've got the voiceover of Sherwin-Williams or LeBron James or whatever. And I look at those and I'm like, well, why did they bother to do that? Like, why don't they just show shoes and t-shirts and say, buy our shoes and our t-shirts? Because they understand they're not selling shoes and t-shirts. They're selling that aspiration of what kind of competitor you could be. They're selling endurance, right? They're selling, overcoming obstacles, all of that, right? And so it's being able to really solidify your brand and, help people get to that ultimate goal of why they're buying and helping them understand that you can deliver that for them. So it's powerful.
Yeah, okay, to dive into storytelling a little bit more, there's a lot of speakers and leaders that tell great personal stories, but what if I'm working in the business world and I'm saying, well, no one tells personal stories, and you can also dive into, different types of stories, but should I use personal stories? Like, what kind of stories can I share? I mean, do I have to share something about my cats or my family? Like, how does that fit in when I'm talking to a bunch of colleagues or a board of directors?
Right. It doesn't always have to be a personal story, and it doesn't always have to be this in-depth thing where you're going to tell your life story. Sometimes it's a simple anecdote that communicates a point, right? So it might not be you're going to break down everything, but it's going to communicate a point. So for instance, like let's take Barack Obama, for instance. And when I think it was in 2008, he was giving a speech about hope, right? And he was kind of giving these little scenarios. And one of the things that he said was, it's like slaves singing a freedom song around a fire. So that's like a sentence, but it is powerful imagery, right? And so thinking about how can you use imagery to make your point and really get in people's minds, right? So it might just be a quick example, but you're using it to amplify, or you're using it to create, a feeling. So especially when you think about being a leader in the workplace, right? It's all about being somebody that people are willing to follow, right? And a lot of times we're able to communicate strongly and powerfully, right? And put thoughts in people's minds that they can remember. It really helps us to stand head and shoulders above. So I don't think it's about going deep into it. I think it's, again, knowing your point, and it could be a personal thing. It could be just something that you've seen out in the marketplace where you can connect the dots for people and use that as a vehicle to make your point.
Yeah, and now we have a great question from Alexis. I'm going to bring it up on screen real quick. I'm curious if we should have prepped stories. Should a situation present the opportunity to tell it similar to an elevator pitch, or is it more about understanding the requirements of good storytelling so that you can develop stories on the fly? What do you think?
So is this like in a business setting or?
I will say this is a business setting, as
Okay.
Alexis is also saying she works in HR. And Alexis, thank you for the question.
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, I like that. So I do think there is value in having a couple scenarios that you can speak to, right? Because a lot of times, let me liken it to interviewing. Maybe this might make sense. So for me, if I go on an interview, I'm not up studying all night about the company, because I know if I have my couple, 3, 4 stories, you could probably ask me anything and I can illustrate my point with that story, right? So it might be, kind of your career path. And to your point, you kind of condensed it and you can speak to it. If somebody asks you a number of different things, you're kind of ready with some talking points to kind of speak to it. So I think that there is some value to having some some general ideas about some kind of stories that you could tell. At the same time, I think just knowing in terms of structure. So when I think about story, I think about, painting the picture, right? So the details, and then of course your point. But then I also think about the third component, which is inviting, right? So it's either inviting somebody to see themselves in the story or inviting them to take action in some sort of way, or, what is the call to action, or what is the outcome you're looking for out of your story? So I think there's some value of keeping those things in mind too.
Yeah. Kelly, what about you when it comes to storytelling? Were you always a good storyteller, or did you have to learn it yourself? What was your journey like?
Yeah, that's interesting. I think that it's come over time for me, because really the only way to get good at it is to do it and to see how it lands. You know what I mean? So I guess some people start off really good at storytelling, but I think it's a matter of doing it and seeing what happens and seeing what works and what doesn't, But I think in my experience, the idea of inviting people into a framework with you or to experience the imagery with you, and individuals feed off of your energy, right? So I think there's a dynamic in telling the story about the actual delivery of it, that draws people in. But I think it's definitely something that is practiced and learned over time and honed, as you go.
Yeah. And of course, since we're talking about storytelling, Kelly, I'm going to ask you to get this in the back of your mind. If you have a story to share with us, and also if you can break it down too, I'm just going to get that in the back of your mind. So later, if you do have a story to share with us, but if you want to give one right now, go ahead.
I'm always ready with a story, kid. So let me know. I'm gonna get on the move. I need to plug my device in so that we stay connected. But I am ready.
Plug it in.
What'd you say?
I said go plug it in.
Okay. Right back.
I have to say, when it comes to storytelling, I think most folks sometimes they don't know how to use their every single day experience or little things to put into the story. Sometimes I feel like, even myself included, when I first started speaking more, I'm like, oh, do I have to have this life-changing event to tell a good story? Then I started noticing the great speakers, no matter, they don't have to be professional speakers, like speaking on the stage. They turn their mundane life situations into, going back to what you're saying, they give it a point and a purpose, and it makes everything so much more powerful. Yeah.
And there's power in those mundane things because we can all relate to them. The trick is putting the color into it and painting the picture in such a way that we are all experiencing it with you. Like you are all experiencing the first time I rode my bike and it had the purple streamers and my knees were shaking and my dad was like, you're there with me and we've all experienced it. So there's power in that. You don't need the story the time you robbed the bank and then you change your mind and then you like you don't necessarily need that. Sometimes it's just about painting that picture and inviting somebody into a powerful lesson from the imagery.
Yeah. Well, if you did rob a bank, I do want to hear that story, and I'm not sure how well that will go in a business setting if you tell your people that you robbed the bank. Kelly, I'm going to turn it back to you. Can you give us a story? Tell us how you're wrapping it around a point, but give us a story, Kelly. We want to hear a story.
All right, you want to hear a story? Well, here's a story I'm going to tell you. I think it's so important that no matter what you face, no matter where you are in life, that you don't forget to push. Don't forget to push. So many years ago, 9 years ago to be exact, I was pregnant. I was good and pregnant, and I woke up and I said, you know what? I think this is going to be the day that I'm going to have this baby. But what I didn't know is I was going to have a baby on the side of the road in Cleveland, Ohio, in the middle of the winter. And so I got up and I told my husband, I think it's time for us to go to the hospital. And he tells me to lay down. He told me to lay down. He was washing dishes. He was taking out the trash and doing all sorts of stuff. And so we are on the freeway flying to the hospital. And we can't make it to the hospital because my water broke in the car, and it was a whole lot happening. And so we're on the side of the road, and finally this ambulance comes, and he sees me, and he says one word to me: push. And I said, there's a lesson in that no matter what you're going through, no matter if you might be in a state of life right now where you feel like you're on the side of the road and you don't know what's going on. You might feel like you don't know what your next move is going to be, or where you need to transition from here. And I want you to remember to push, even though it's uncomfortable, even though it might not be ideal. This is the time, and this is the season for you to push.
Oh man, yeah, you got me from that story. You got me when you said, when he said one word, and I was like, push. That was good. Okay, Kelly, can you break that down for us? You know, why and why do you think that was a good story? Like, break down the components for us.
Yeah, so I just like to start it off by saying push, because now people know I'm going somewhere, but they don't know exactly where. Like, what is she about to say? Okay. So I started off with that. It's like some semblance of a point of where we're going, and then try to paint some of those details, and then wrap it up with right where I'm going, like to push in your life, right? So connecting the dots between the details of the scenario, but what I'm really talking about is you. I'm really talking about you in your life. I'm really talking about something that you could apply. So I think that, I think that's just like a basic framework that I try to think about.
Yeah, yeah. And for people that's listening right now, I love how Kelly, you notice how she put in dialogue, right, into her story. And, that one guy said, push. And you basically used that word, that dialogue, and you turned it into a message. So basically, you connected the dots. You took what other people were saying or what they were doing, and then you flipped it back around to us, the audience, right now. So I know a lot of people, when it comes to storytelling, they think, oh, I have to have the story. But there are things that's going on around us. You can use other people's what they're saying, what they're thinking, how they are looking, use all of this, and then wrap it into your story.
I had a thought.
Yeah.
I was thinking about mistakes. Mistakes make amazing stories, and even think about ways in the business setting where you can show a little bit of vulnerability and a little bit of your resiliency and telling a story about something that didn't go right, what you did to fix it, and all those sorts of things. So that's another opportunity. Like the mountaintops are opportunities for stories, and also those pit moments. Learn how to maximize those. Like anytime that you're learning something through any sort of scenario and you're able to communicate that, especially in a way where you're bringing out a point, like how it made you better, how it made the company better, or et cetera, I think there's power in that too.
Yeah, and talking about mistakes, the ones that we can use, but what are some mistakes do you see that people are making when they do tell stories?
Yeah, I think a big one is the rambling. Okay, like getting lost in all of the details. And that's why I think the point is so crucial, because then okay, every single word that I say has to be relevant to my point. So I think that's a thing. I think also making it too complicated. So I like to think about a story, like try to minimize the amount of characters, minimize the settings. Like you don't want to go from home to the bank to the church, to, so many things where people might get confused. And then I think too, like I said before, choosing the wrong story that's not really that perfect match for really where you want people to go. But I would say maybe the biggest one, okay, is not practicing, because that's really how you fine tune the delivery and really bringing it to life. A lot of times when we see speakers really, really good at stories, it's because they have told that story so many times, they've literally perfected it. And we might not be doing that, right? But there's something to be said for, you've run through it enough where you have some comfort level. I think that's important too.
Yeah. That practice makes perfect, right? I always say in real estate is about location, location, location. When it comes to speaking, practice, practice, practice. Now we have a question from Mr. Odell Bazell. How do you know how many stories to interject into a talk? What would you say?
That's a good question. So I look at it depends, because it's like there's some art to it and some science to it. But I think once you have, if I think about a talk, right, I think about that main headline, the big idea, and then you're going to have some supporting ideas underneath it. So there's a sense in which you could have a story, right, for every one of those supporting points. That's possible. I don't think it's always necessary, but it's possible. So you could think about, point, story, point, illustration, to start with, but I don't think that it always has to be so formulaic, that's
how long should the stories be? How long are stories? Are they always long, or can they be like 5 seconds? Is that a story? Like a 5 second, like what?
Yeah, I think it depends. This is just my opinion. When they're really short, sometimes I think about it as like an anecdote or an illustration. I think of a story as a little bit more fully developed that has like a beginning, middle, and end. But I think the story can be as long as you can hold the interest and you can make it interesting and tie it to the point, because that's what everybody is listening for. Like, what is in here for me? So in general, I think the shorter the better, because I feel like once you start talking, like the clock is ticking. Like, where are you going with this? But I don't think there's a magic number. I think you could tell a long story if you can keep it focused, on your point, and interesting.
Yeah. Now, what about fables and myths and all of that stuff? What do you have to say about that? Can we use that? Is it good to use that? What are your thoughts?
Do you mean like, give me an example?
Fables. So we're talking about like, the scorpion. The scorpion was swimming across the water one day. Did you hear about that? Okay,
Yeah.
And I'll go into that.
Right.
So
I think so. I think that's such a powerful way to teach. Especially when you're trying to get it. I love stuff like that. There's some, books that are written as, like fables, like Lencioni. Am I saying his name right? He has lots of books that are like fables. It's like an illustration of something, and then after that, he kind of breaks down the story that he was telling and what it means. So yeah, I love it. I'm a fan, and then it gives you that opportunity to come in and really, break down what it meant. So
yeah. Now, Kelly, what would you say to people, who are pumped up about stories right now? And after watching this video, what do you think are some actionable things that they can do today, right now, to get better at their storytelling?
Yeah, I think going back to the question that was asked earlier, I think it would be about, for your context, maybe if you're maybe you're a leader in business, and you want to use story to be able to motivate or what have you, or you just want to be able to integrate story when you're networking or introducing yourself. Think about, a story. Maybe it's a story or two or a couple. What are those stories going to be for you, right? And begin to think about that, right? So what stories do I want to tell? What is the point of said story? And what details do I want to include, right? And then begin to get comfortable telling that story. So the only way we get comfortable telling that story is by telling that story, and so look for opportunities to be able to share, whether that's on some type of live platform on social media, whether it's, some sort of meetings or maybe committees that you're going to join in the workplace. But get in the habit of telling the story, because the more that you hear yourself say the words, that's how you're going to elevate to that next level. And I would just say, too, don't get so lost in the mechanics of the story that you don't forget the story is a vehicle to connect with who you're talking to. So as you're crafting, where am I going to go with it? How's it going to work? Make sure that it's crafted around who am I going to talk to, and how am I going to draw them in, right? What do I want them to do, feel, etc., and keeping all that front and center. Yes, I'd say start small and just begin to craft and get your mind kind of churning around that.
Kelly, you used a personal story a little bit earlier. So let's say people who are listening right now and they say, oh, yeah, I should use more personal stories, but they might not feel as comfortable to go into a meeting or the next presentation and say, oh, I should use a personal story. Like, what would you suggest for someone to be more comfortable and confident with sharing personal stories into what they're doing already?
Yeah. I would say, again, start with something that all people probably have had an experience with, so it doesn't feel like quite so vulnerable or what have you. I think that's a good place to start. Like, think about what are those common things that we've all experienced, and you have too, and think back to it. How did it look? How did you feel? All those things. What did you learn? And try to bring that to light. And just find little ways to put yourself out there. And the cool thing about stories is that you're going to be so surprised how it draws people in. You're going to be so surprised, especially if you're in an environment where people aren't really doing that. They aren't really talking like that or whatnot. You're going to be surprised by how magnetic you're going to be just by beginning to reveal a little bit and tell a story.
Yeah, that's it. Now, if you are watching this right now, live or the replay, and if you're loving what Kelly is saying, Kelly, where can they follow you to continue the conversation or to learn more from you?
Absolutely. Well, you can find me on LinkedIn at Kelly D. Parker. You can find me on Instagram at IamKellyDParker.com. And then, of course, my website, KellyDParker.com.
Cool. Are you working on any special projects right now, Kelly?
I'm in the middle of what I like to call Virtual Speakers Boot Camp. And that's something that I'm going to be releasing really soon. So make sure you guys stay connected if that sounds interesting to you. And it's going to be great.
Awesome. Yeah. So usually time just flew by today, maybe because we're talking about storytelling. Usually at the end of the interviews, Kelly, I always like to ask my guests, what's your 1-minute message for us on how to tell better stories? Okay. What is your 1-minute message on how to tell better stories?
So if you want to tell better stories, my advice to you is to start paying more attention. The life that you are living is a story in action. And everything that you're learning through the life that you're living and the stories you are experiencing really are meant to move others forward. And so I would encourage you to pay more attention to your life and also pay more attention to the things that you're experiencing, the movies that you're watching, different things that your friends and family are going through. There are stories all around you. So I would say heighten your, put your antennas up so that you can see a little clearer the stories. And then also, what are the lessons that are coming out of everything that you are experiencing? And I think that's a great first step in being an awesome storyteller.
Yeah, and ladies and gentlemen, if you are loving what Kelly is saying, put the strategies and tips that she have shared with us today into action right now, into action in your next Zoom call, into action in your next meeting. I remember a while back, I was working with a client and he wanted to get better with his storytelling. So I asked him and I said, hey, if you want to become a better storyteller, are you actually telling any stories right now? And he said, no, I'm not telling any stories. Now, same thing for you. If you want to become a better storyteller, are you telling any stories right now? If you are answering, no, I'm not telling as many stories, then one of the best things that you can do is go take action and tell stories. I just want to say, Kelly, thank you once again for joining us today for this rich conversation about how to tell better stories.
Thank you for having me. This was so much fun.
Yeah. Any last words before we go for the day?
Any last words? I would say, just echoing what you said, do it. Start. Be willing to start where you are so that you can get better from there. But I promise you, if you are doing nothing, you will not get any better, right? And so, get in there, we start where we are, and that's how we enhance our skills.
Yes. So Kelly, thank you once again for joining us for our interview today. And everyone that's watching, thank you for tuning in. Have a great day.